Welcome to the podcast. We've got our hosts here, myself, Dave Darbstandler, and Oren Potts. Oren, good to see you as always.
Good to see you, Dave. Ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, so excited about the topic today. We know that obviously budgets are completed for school districts at this point in the year, but we feel like this is a relevant topic as it's probably fresh in your mind. Regardless of your position there at the school districts that you're probably dealing with. If you listen to this, you're dealing with budgets or technology in some way or another. So today we're going to be talking really about the three things to consider when budgeting and forecasting for technology within a school district. So Oren, to kick that off, I know you've got your three pillars, and maybe we can just start with maybe just kind of high overview of what you've seen within budgets, and then kicking us off with number one.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start off, what I've seen with budgets, at least in my area and who I've engaged with, I've mostly seen refresh plans. Back, I believe, in 2014, E-rate rules dictated that you had to have a technology plan, which I don't think to get E-rate funding. Which I don't think is the case anymore. So a lot of those fell to the wayside. So this is super important, especially with anyone handling the public funds. So CBO, CFO, treasurer, whatever that title is. So number one, so pillar number one is very basic. Understanding where your infrastructure sits right now. We work with a lot of school districts, county offices all over the country. Oftentimes when we ask some questions about their infrastructure, they have to go find that information. So to be able to create a budget, you need to know what you have right now. So you need to know the models that you have right now. You need to know when they were purchased, when those models go end of sale and end of life. Those are two different things. So end of sale means the manufacturer is no longer going to sell that particular model out any longer, but they will support it. So you can still purchase support in case the hardware fails, and you can get it replaced, and you can work with their TAC, which is their support team, to get things resolved. End of life means they are no longer going to sell it. They are no longer going to support it, no matter how much money you try to pay them. So those dates are very important. So you have to understand what you have now for switching, for your wireless. We're talking about, technology infrastructure, switching, wireless, your systems. So if you have hosts, your phone system, understanding the models, when you purchase those, and then those dates. So that's going to allow you to start planning.
And to kind of break it down, I mean, like, when you say this, you're saying you're doing an audit of this physically, right? So you're probably being deployed to sites and to IDFs and MDFs, things like that. And you're putting stuff in a spreadsheet, probably the serial numbers, the models, where it's located. And, obviously some districts have this already in some type of IT documentation system, but this is kind of a true, what we've seen too is obviously you need to take photos, you need to kind of have a real honest look at what you have going on, right? Is that kind of more or less what you're saying, so that you can actually this is your kind of foundation to planning?
Absolutely. It's worth it. Once you do it once, it gets easier as you go. You hit the nail on the head about sending a crew out to the IDFs, the MDFs, the server closets to verify in person. So most districts have some sort of system that they can log into, that they might be able to see equipment. Sometimes equipment doesn't get into that system. When you start your budget and your plan, you want to make sure you're 100% on what you have to make sure your numbers are accurate and you're not missing things down the road. That when you get into things like E-rate and you get into funding that you need, it gets really messy if you start missing equipment. So
what are some other things that you've seen like bite people though? Like, is there, for instance, like we're talking about just infrastructure, obviously sometimes your cabling is inadequate, right? Sometimes your power is inadequate. sometimes all the way down to, obviously different types of ceiling mounts, things like that are going to probably get you as well if you're switching out, wireless equipment. So, I mean, maybe talk to some of those things you've seen, or where stuff that's ended up being a bigger price tag than what was anticipated, right?
Yes. Making sure that you have firm backing on your cabinets. I have seen cabinets take 4 to 6 foot falls off the wall in class, out onto and breaking tables. Those house equipment and the equipment itself is worth, thousands of dollars. Some gotchas are making sure that this valuable equipment is in a room that is temperature controlled, humidity controlled. It's not in some sort of area where the mop buckets are, which usually it is, or outside access where there's free outside air coming into the room. I have seen ports on switches rust over. I've seen it all.
Wow.
So while you're assessing the area, taking these pictures, you need to take that into account, because like I was alluding to with you, there are funding sources that can help you move those and set them into a proper area, especially when you're looking at refreshing everything. You want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, you don't want servers and network equipment falling on students either, right? So
yeah,
that's something you want to try to avoid. So yeah, so maybe just get into your first pillar. Like, talk a little bit about kind of your first point. Summing it up, just the infrastructure. Obviously, just at a high level, the low hanging stuff they could do with this. First point is like, hey, just kind of know what you have, right? Is that kind of the theme? It's just,
yep.
You've got to have your foundation to build from. Yeah.
Yep. Getting specific, knowing how many models, the model number, the quantity, the location, and the brand. Serial numbers are great also when you're looking at things like support contracts. So knowing those things is going to help you move forward on the next step, because without knowing what you have, you're not going to be able to plan for what needs to be replaced.
And then moved on to your second point. Obviously, these kind of tie together. So just rolling on kind of what you do after you know what you have.
Once you understand what you have in your environment as a whole for your IT, you're going to want to create a yearly calendar of when those systems need to be refreshed. And how do you do that? There's 2 major things that are going to allow you to get to that point. Number 1 is either working with your internal team or with a third-party provider to put together a design to replace whatever the equipment is, right? So even if they're going to be going through, they're going to be putting together a design for you. And they're going to also look at the age of the equipment and when it needs to be replaced. I'm going to throw out an example. Wireless access points industry standard is 5 years. So you purchase wireless access point, as long as you're not purchasing old antiquated equipment, you purchase an access point, it stays up there for 5 years, then it needs to be replaced. By the 5-year mark for that particular piece of infrastructure, you either have new features coming out, the software version for the controller that controls it has been updated so far that it won't support those APs anymore, that kind of thing. So you need to work with your team or some other provider to put together that plan and that design for the refresh. And then they're in that process, they're going to tell you, or they should be able to tell you, industry standards on when it needs to be replaced. How long until you need to replace your host? How long until you need to refresh your network infrastructure? How long until you need to refresh your firewall? And you need to put those onto a calendar. We always recommend industry standards for those, and all of that information can be found online, can be found with your provider. I threw out one there for wireless. That's 5 years. Those industry standards go right into your calendar on, I need to replace my switching in 2028, right? So you're at the step where you're starting to put things onto your calendar.
You mentioned this kind of at the beginning, right? You kind of highlighted over just, hey, I guess the in parentheses, it's like if it's new equipment, right? Which what we've seen is school districts to go out and eBay a bunch of stuff, and they're having to eBay hundreds of units, right? Sometimes thousands. I think, this came up in a meeting this morning, actually, with another leader where, talking about the short-term gain that ends up costing you in the long term, right? And this is to your point with calendaring and things like that. You think you're saving some bucks today, but in reality, you end up spending way more money down the road because there's a lot of key advantages of doing this planning. Obviously, all the way down to if you're buying that in bulk from a actual manufacturer, you're avoiding all kinds of legal issues, right? Whether it's gray market stuff or whatever. And then also just the fact that, you have the support of the manufacturer from the design standpoint, right? So they're helping you design it. But also there's just the things that cost you a lot more later, right? So just the downtime, the scrapping to get a site back up when a bunch of the equipment's failed, where it's no longer supported. And then obviously you've got some key security issues. Is that kind of the stuff you would highlight as well, or?
100% instructional time. So the time that the students are learning, you're sacrificing that. You're sacrificing your team's time, that it takes hours and weekends and sometimes holidays, because everybody knows infrastructure tends to go out on Christmas or July 4th. That's just how it works. So those outages impact your shareholders. Who are your shareholders? Mostly your students. Students are number one, right? And then it's going to affect your staff. And then that always trickles down to the community and the parents who are upset. But purchasing the proper equipment, just like you said, another great benefit is working with the manufacturers. The manufacturers know best. They make the equipment. If you're going out there and you're buying refurbs, you're going gray market, you're going on eBay just to save a couple bucks, it is going to kill you and your team, and the district will take that hit later on.
Yeah, great insight. And those are critical things. I mean, I think that's particularly people that don't have experience in technology planning. It doesn't work like other things, right? Like it doesn't work like the desks you order or, just the things that are more static. It's constantly changing, and there's a lot of risk that's maybe, something you can't see, right, in the short term. So
once you put all your squares onto your calendar, okay, I need to refresh my switching in 2025. The wireless needs to go in 2024. My hosts are good till 2026. Once you have all of those squares in there, the next piece is to estimate the cost. How do you estimate the cost? Well, this goes back to a couple things. There's an easy way, if you really, just to start off, to give you a good starting point. And then there's the way that you should be doing it. Number one, working with your team or an outside organization to help you do the design. They're going to give you the cost of what it is today, right? Anytime you get a design and you're requesting a design and you're not going to be doing that project for 2 years, possibly even 12 months at this point, you're going to want to tack on 20%. So if you don't know where to start, but you know that you just did your network refresh 1 or 2 years ago, and you know what the price tag was for that, slap on 20%, and that'll give you at least a number to start with for your estimated cost. So you start filling in those squares. Okay, my switching cost this much. I bump it 20%. Boom. That's in whatever year I just said. That's in whatever year. And once you fill all of that out for all your infrastructure, firewall, switching, wireless, phones, host, anything else you have, if you have door access and that's part of your organization, you can include that as well. Review the plan. Yeah, I have spoken with so many CBOs, CFOs, treasurers, the representatives in charge of those public funds, and they jump for joy when you have these budgets, because I can work with the district and say, hey, expect a CapEx or a capital expenditure of $210,000 in 2025 because you need to replace X, Y, and Z. And this starts the conversation. This helps them budget out and put money in certain buckets over the years to account for that ahead of time. Too many times these CBOs and treasurers and everybody, their approach and say, hey, in 6 months, I need $300,000. In 6 months, I need $1.2 million to refresh my switch. In 6 months, I need 25 grand. Depending on the size of your organization, those are bombs. Those are nukes.
Right. And there's obviously it's probably hitting people from the side, right? And I've been in those meetings when those conversations come up and it wasn't expected, right? And they just came off maybe a couple other agenda items that were pretty ugly too, right? So I think you look a lot better as a leader and as an IT leader, business leader, whatever your position is. If you're able to forecast this stuff out, it just obviously brings a lot more confidence to your competency in that role as well, probably, I assume.
The further out ahead of these things that you can get. So once you have your budget, you have your estimated cost, you have your plan, you have your rough plan, that gives you time to find funding. That gives you time to plan for E-rate, right? It gives you time to plan for any of the government funding that comes out. I know during COVID, we had a ton of Telecommunications Act, just funding dropping everywhere, money raining from the sky. So that allows you to plan and make the best use of your funds, best bang for your buck, right? And what does that mean? That means that the students win, the staff win, the community wins, and your team wins because you're going to get better equipment, proper equipment, for a better price when you're out ahead of these things. I do have a side note on this that I want to bring up, that when I'm speaking with districts and we're doing budgeting and planning, I always bring this up. So, for example, if we're budgeting to replace a host, and I know that we replaced your host 2 years ago, let's say I'm making a new budget. We replaced your host 2 years ago. So I take that cost, I mark it up 20%. I throw it out to whatever the industry standard is for that particular device. And let's just say it lands in 2025. Okay, cool. Technology changes rapidly. So be aware that when you're having these discussions around your budget, that solution may look completely different, right? So in 2025, or as you approach that year in your planning, that host, and let's just say it was $200,000, a CapEx cost $200,000 to replace that host, could turn into a $1,500 a month OpEx cost because you're actually migrating that to the cloud. So technology changes as you move along. So those are things to keep in mind when you have these budgets.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the thing we see of recent, right? So you have people scrambling at points if they haven't done this planning, and you haven't really helped the vendor out in that case because all of a sudden you're dropping a ball on them that you need $1 million in equipment or whatever the case is. And with current issues we've had with supply chain, you may not even be able to get that equipment, right? So if you're thinking that short term and you're just trying to get this done in the next 3 months, whatever the case is, and it's a huge project, you may be limited on the type of equipment or the models you're able to get. From my experience, and you've probably seen the same thing, Roy, just this, it's difficult to do that to your vendors as well. You're kind of doing them a disservice, right?
Oh, absolutely. And to your point, Dave, I have seen many times where it's that scramble. They're trying to put everything together. And what happens? They default to what they've already done. So you don't have that proactive thinking. You don't have, can I migrate this to the cloud? Would it be a better experience for my users? Would it be more secure than what we have now? Would it have more redundancy? You don't have time. You have to put everything together. They're like, okay, I know what worked last time. We're just going to replace it like for like and move on. You get trapped in that cycle. So if you can use things like a budget, like these budget and these forecasting tools, it allows you to step out ahead and plan for funding, making sure you have the best solution, making sure all your shareholders are getting the best bang for their buck and having the best experience.
Warren, this is all really good stuff. I think this is helpful, particularly for districts that maybe just came out of budgeting, and it's always this, kind of big mystery ball that trying to figure it out. But really, when you break it down into little pieces, and you give yourself enough time, you look better to everybody around you as far as from a leadership perspective, and that's because you're actually doing the proactive work, right? And you're out in front of it. So I think that's really exciting. Obviously, we didn't touch on, there's some new line items, for budgeting. Obviously, schools in particular need to be focusing more on security, and we can touch on that in future podcasts, but there's definitely some newer line items that need to make sure that this equipment is actually properly secured, and that you're also looking and monitoring traffic as you should be on your network. And those are all going to be new line items in your budget, right? That weren't there before probably. So
when you set it up for the first time, it takes a lot of time. It takes thinking, it takes time. But once it's set up, you are just rolling from there on out. You already know what you've done in the past, what it costs. It's already in a whatever sheet or whatever format you want it, showing what year. So, and then you just, as soon as you install something new, it immediately goes onto the budget and gets pushed out that many years and has a box and has an estimated cost for more than what it was then, because inflation and what have you. I'll get into that, but you know your plan, so you're one step ahead of the game. So it just wade through the water at the beginning. It gets a lot easier once it's set up.
Yeah, it's a great point, especially when you're talking 5 years out. I think just coming from a finance perspective, when you're putting those budgets together, 1 or 2 years should be pretty dead on. But when you get to 5 years, it really is, you're throwing a dart out there because so much can change between now and that 5-year mark, particularly in technology. So that's exactly right. You need to start somewhere. And what most people do is they don't ever do anything, right? So they're shooting from the hip on this stuff, and it ends up costing them a lot of time, a lot of grief, a lot of stress, and a lot of extra costs that's not necessary. So this is great stuff, Warren. I think this is a great kind of place to end the podcast. And thank you guys for joining us, and looking forward to catching you next time.
Thanks, everyone.